Welcome everybody and happy Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, March 9th, 2021, and I'm happy that you are all here with me today to talk about some illness exclusion policies. Illness exclusion policies is today's webinar. And today we're going to mainly focus on illness exclusion policies in a non-pandemic world. So I know that right now we're following a lot of enhanced health policies and health guidelines and anticipating some new guidance in the very near future from Health and Human Services, as we transition into a post-pandemic world. But today we're just going to talk about normal everyday life when we're not dealing with a pandemic, and how to deal with ill children and the families, and what type of policies should you adopt. So that's kind of our focus for today. So if we could try to stay clear of pandemic related questions, that will keep us on focus right there. All right, and today's going to be a little bit of a shorter webinar. I don't think this material is going to take us the entire hour. So, those of you that are hopping on right now, like I said, it probably will be a little bit of a shorter webinar today. But I've got some great resources to share with you, some tools to help your program be successful, as we kind of move through this. Now, one of the first things I want to either introduce you to or remind you of is this amazing book right here called Caring for Our Children, and is the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs. I know that I've mentioned this book a couple of times in several different webinars, but I definitely encourage you to get a copy of this book and keep it as a resource. I got mine from Amazon, so good old Amazon right there. You can order it and it looks really nice and pretty like this. You can actually get this book off of the internet, and you can download it and print it yourself. And I found it on the internet for free. I don't know if it's supposed to be on the internet for free, but when I Googled it, I found it for free. Now, it is 600 pages long, so you need to be ready for some good printing if you want to do that. But I got the nice pretty book. The reason why I'm showing you the National Health and Safety Performance Standard Guidelines for Early Care and Education Programs, this book has been remarkable when it comes to writing or amending your policies. Probably I've been using it for the last 2.5 years now. And all of the policies that I have rewritten have been based on the material in this book right here. So it's really, really fantastic, to keep as a resource. Even when you're dealing with just parent topics, parent issues, staff issues, it's got some really good resources in it. So grab a copy of that. The other reason why I'm showing you this is that child care licensing here in Texas uses this book to create minimum standards. So you'll notice that a lot of our child care minimum standards have been drafted off of the material in this book. Even some of the new standards that we're going to be seeing in the very near future are drafted off of this book right here. So, and even when you look at our current minimum standards on illness and injury, it's almost word for word what you're seeing right here. So good stuff. And the chapter on illness exclusion starts on page 141 of this book, if you just want to use that as a reference. But definitely wanted to show that to you right there. Now, the first thing that I want to make sure that we address in your policy manual. So in your parent policy manual, it's very important that you have in there that your program is designed for well children, all right? Your program is not designed to care for ill children, all right? Unless you have a Get Well Care license, which not a lot of people have it. I have seen them out there, but there's not a lot of people that have a Get Well Care license where you're actually licensed to be able to care for ill children. Our program is designed for well children, all right? I would probably even put that in bold print in your policy manual, okay? So that parents know that, when their child is not feeling well, they got a runny nose or whatnot, that's really not what we're designed for, all right? So, that's the first thing I want to address right there. The other thing, we're going to hit it hard, hit it big right here at the beginning of our webinar. I would make sure that you also put it in your policy manual that when you are making a decision on whether or not to exclude a child from care, the illness exclusion is based on policy, not circumstance, all right? So, the decision to exclude a child is 100% based on policy, all right? Not circumstance or the child or the family. I think that's very important to put in your policy manual as well. Now, the hard thing for you is to implement that and to follow that. So that's pretty important right there. All right. So let's go ahead and just kind of dig into what are the child care minimum standards, expectations when dealing with illnesses in your program. Now, first off, the overall goal is to establish a safe and healthy environment where you are sanitizing and disinfecting, you are following proper hand washing, and you shouldn't have a lot of illnesses coming out of your program. And I'm sure a lot of you would agree with me. I mean, I've had conversations with pediatricians before that, when you take the child care minimum standards to the pediatrician's office and you go over the health practice chapter, they will agree with you that you should have a healthy program. Children should not be getting sick from your program. They're more likely to get sick walking through, a retail establishment or from home than they are your program, right? And we all know that. So I think that, first off, in your policy manual, it's very important for you to address what are your health and safety practices, what are your hand washing practices, what are your disinfecting practices. Share that with mom and dad in your policy manual and recommend that they do the same thing at home, all right? It's not just you that's responsible for maintaining a healthy environment. Parents have to do their part at home, all right? It does no good for us to, sanitize and disinfect and hand wash and maintain a healthy environment if mom and dad are just exposing the child to all kinds of germs and then they're sending them to our program. It defeats the purpose, all right? But, mom and dad don't get annual training like we do on health practices and recognizing and preventing childhood illnesses. So, we got to respect and understand that mom and dad are doing the best they can with what they've got. We've got to be an advocate for the whole family so we can help educate that family on what to do at home to help us maintain a healthy environment. All right? So, that's the first thing I recommend in your policy manual. Y'all know another one of my golden rules that we talk about in so many of our webinars, documentation, all right? So if it's not written down, it didn't happen. So you've got to document in your program. I recommend you have an illness log, all right? And this is a very, very simple Excel spreadsheet that I created right here. Very, very simple, today's date. What is the classroom or the teacher? What is the child's name? What are their signs and symptoms, or why are you excluding them? I like to keep these illness logs right here because you start noticing trends, all right, whenever you do this. Is it one particular child, one particular family that's continuing to get ill? Is it one particular classroom that illnesses are coming out of? Is it one particular teacher that continues to have ill children? And when you're doing this just off of the top of your head, you don't realize these trends, all right? When you write it down and you document it, it's pretty interesting how you'll start noticing this, that you only have illnesses out of certain classrooms. That might mean that we need to pay a little bit closer attention to disinfecting practices and hand washing practices, screening of children whenever they're coming into our program. Like I said, we're really going to focus today on a non-pandemic world. We're an everyday world right here. But even in a non-pandemic world, you should be doing daily health checks when children are coming in, and that needs to be included in your policies. Per child care minimum standards, you do need to have a policy on health checks. and we definitely recommend that, all right? So, when the child is coming in, you're screening them, all right? Now, again, I'm the one that said we're going to stay away from the pandemic today, and I keep coming back to it, right? I do think that moving forward, we're going to have a lot more cooperation from parents on this issue, a lot more understanding on parents on this issue. I also think that we are going to be a lot more cautious and conscious of health screenings when both children and employees are coming into our program. We're going to be a lot more aware of that, and we're not going to be letting ill children in, all right? So this has been a little bit of an eye-opener for everyone. When it comes to creating your policies on illness exclusion, I've always recommended that you just simply cut and paste right out of the child care minimum standards, all right? Basically everything that they have in the standards, word for word, you cut it and you paste it into your policies. That way, if a parent does get upset with you because you're excluding their child, hey mom, I would love to take care of your sick child, but licensing won't let me, all right? It's kind of nice to be able to put it back on the state. So, this is not an area that I typically recommend exceeding on, all right? We kind of follow it. We write our policies exactly what's in the minimum standards, and we follow that to a T, all right? Now, moving forward, over the past year, we have enhanced our illness exclusion policies with the pandemic, excluding children for 72 hours. They must be fever-free, symptom-free, without medication for 72 hours before they can return to care. We've done that based on CDC guidelines. We've done that based on governor's protocols, HHS protocols, etc. Moving forward, once we get into a post-pandemic world, you might want to evaluate that. Do you want to keep that policy of 72 hours of exclusion? Do you want to go back to the 24? All right. Now, we're still waiting on some guidance from Health and Human Services, with some of the new things that are coming out right now. What I have thought about for our programs is that, definitely going to go back to the 24 hours of fever-free, symptom-free, without medication before they can return. But I'm probably going to add to this that it is strongly recommended that the child be excluded for 72 hours, all right? So we'll stick to the solid 24, but a recommended 72 moving forward. Now again, if Health and Human Services comes out with different guidance, then we will adapt accordingly. So stay tuned for that, all right? I think it's important to also focus on, what the child care minimum standard says under 746-3601 on page 128 of the minimum standards is that, you must not allow an ill child to attend your program if one or more of the following exist. The illness prevents the child from participating comfortably in the child care center's activities, including outdoor play. That's huge, and I recommend that you highlight this, all right, right there. And I have been known to kind of keep copies of the child care minimum standards, at the front desk, and especially if a parent starts giving you a hard time about, 746-3601 number 1, hey, this is not my rule. This is child care licensing's rule. And I think the key word right here, there's two big key parts to this sentence that I really want people to focus on. The illness prevents the child from participating comfortably in the child care center's activities. So, we get all hung up on this temperature. I need to take the child's temperature, and is it 100? Well then the parent's like, you don't know how to read a thermometer, or your thermometer's bad. And by the time I got him to the pediatrician's office, he wasn't running a temperature. Y'all, stop focusing on this temperature so much. All right, stop focusing on this temperature so much. Can the child comfortably participate in the program's activities? That's what we should be looking at, all right? Regardless of his temperature, regardless of the sign or symptom, can they comfortably participate? For example, children that parents come and pick them up and take them to the doctor, and they get a shot. They get their booster. And then the parent wants to bring them back, all right? And then they'll usually say something about, oh, I'm going to sign in some Tylenol because they might run a low-grade fever after they receive their immunization. Okay, but is the child comfortable? All right, because I remember being a child and getting, my shots, and it hurt. And I hurt for the rest of the day, very painful right there. So that's what we really need to be looking at. A very common policy that we see in programs, and you might want to consider this one, is that if a child does receive an immunization, they have to be out for the rest of the day. That the parent is prohibited from bringing them back after they receive an immunization, all right? Because the child needs to be comfortable, and they need to be in a comfortable environment, all right? So, take that into consideration, and when you're having conversations with your parents, we want to talk about whether or not the child is comfortable. I had a situation one time a few years ago where, it was exactly what I just described. Mom was yelling and screaming, saying that we don't know how to read a thermometer, and by the time she gets the kid to the doctor, he's no longer running a fever. Well, probably because she gave him Motrin in the car on the way there, but that's another story. But the whole time this mom is like ripping into me about her child not being sick. The child is like tugging on mom's arm going, Mommy, I don't feel good. Mommy, can we go home? I want to lay down. And she's like, shh, I'm talking to Mr. Tim right now. And, and she's just going off about this temperature, and I'm like, well, we really need to not focus on the temperature. Bottom line is your child doesn't feel good, all right? He can't participate comfortably in the program's activities. That's what we've got to focus on, all right? And then, of course, the second part of this sentence is that it says the illness prevents the child from participating comfortably in the child care center's activities, including outdoor play. So when that parent comes in and says, I don't want my child to go outside today, well, if they're too sick to go outside, then they're too sick to be at the program. All right, and this is another one that in your policies, I would put this in bold print. All right, now another thing, those of you that are taking notes, definitely I would write this down. Doctors don't run your business, you do. All right, so sometimes people think that, well, if they bring in a note from a healthcare professional, then I've got to allow the child back or do what the note says. No, you don't, all right? Unless it's related to a disability or a special need, and that's a whole other workshop that, we've got available to you, all right? But, a doctor saying, I have, seen this child in my office and they may return to care, and I need more information than that, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit right there. But I'm bringing this up because I know that I've gotten many times parents that bring me a doctor's note saying, Vanessa is not allowed to go outside. Okay, well then Vanessa can't come here. All right, there's several reasons for that. Number one, you got to look at minimum standards. It's a violation of minimum standards. All right, if the child cannot participate in program activities, including outdoor play, then they should not be in your program. This is not me saying this. This is right here in minimum standards. All right. The other thing is that when you say, oh well, this kid can't go outside. Well, what are you going to do with them? Where are you going to put them? Because the teacher and the rest of the children are outside. You really don't want to put them in another classroom because now you're mixing children. It's going to alter your child staff ratios. It could alter your group size. It's adding an extra burden to that other teacher. It may not be an age-appropriate classroom for that child to be in. All right. You don't want to have them sit up in the office because now if they're sitting up in the office, you're responsible for supervising and interacting with that child, so you can no longer do administrative or clerical duties per minimum standards, all right? Plus, in the event that you have a significant event, you have an emergency in your program, if you've got a child sitting up in your office, what are you going to do? All right? Or heaven forbid, you have a person that tries to come into your program to cause harm. You have an intruder, or an active shooter, and you've got a kid sitting up in the office, they're a sitting duck. All right? So, several reasons why they need to be in their assigned classroom right there. All right? Just kind of looking at, one of the comments that just came in, and we're going to talk about this in just a little bit, Karen, but yes, I do agree that we allow children back into our programs too soon, all right? That sometimes even healthcare professionals will send them back into our programs too soon. You have got to make decisions that are in the best interest of the entire program. You have to make decisions that are in the best interest of every child, every employee, not just that child or that family. Okay, you have to make global decisions, and sometimes we have to explain that to the families that look, I've got to make a decision that's in the best interest of the entire school. All right, but that's why I'm going to go back to what I said at the very beginning of this workshop, because I see a lot of people that are kind of hopping in. Decisions to exclude are based on policy, not circumstance or child. All right. So what does your policy say? And you're going to stick to that. All right. If the illness results in a greater need for care without compromising the health, safety, and supervision of the other children. So if you're having to give a little bit more attention to that child, then that obviously would require them to be excluded. Or if the child has one or more of the following signs or symptoms: an oral temperature of 101, an ear temperature of 100, or an armpit or auxiliary temperature of 100. Now, y'all know that back in 2016, these temperatures changed, all right? I was just working with a program what's today, Tuesday, the end of last week, that we're still going by the temperatures from 5 years ago, all right? Now, they were fine as far as licensing was concerned, because it would be considered exceeding at this point. But they did, these did change to 100 and 101. It's no longer the 0.4 or whatever. All right. The other thing I just want to add to this with the armpit temperature, the ear temperature of 100, and then an oral temperature of 101. Y'all know, something that we've been doing for 30 years now, ever since I've been working in this industry, is anytime you take a temperature under the arm, people add a degree. Who told you to do that? All right, y'all know that there's like nothing in writing telling you to do that. It's like a myth. All right, a unicorn and Bigfoot got together and told you to add a degree. There's no reason for that. And, a medical professional might say, well, there is a 1 degree difference between body temperature and oral temperature. And I'm like, yes, that is true. There is a 1 degree difference between body temperature and oral temperature. But if you notice in the child care minimum standards, they already take that into consideration. That's why it says an oral temperature of 101, an ear or an armpit temperature of 100. All right, they already take that 1 degree into consideration. So yeah, now most of us these days, I meant to bring one in here, are using the forehead, gun, zapper right there. You just want to check the manufacturer's instructions on whether that's body temperature. Most of them are body temperature, but just make sure that that's what it's looking at right there. All right. And of course, you must not allow a child to stay in your program if there are signs or symptoms of other possible severe illnesses, such as being lethargic, abnormal breathing, uncontrolled diarrhea, 2 or more vomiting episodes in a 24-hour period, rash, fever, mouth sores and drooling, changes in their behavior, and other signs that could show an illness. And I'm going to go back to this book right here that I introduced at the beginning of the webinar. You're going to see all of these items that I just rattled off actually are listed out in this book as signs for exclusion in a little bit more detail. So again, if you have that parent that is kind of arguing your policy, this is once again a wonderful resource to say, hey mom, I'm not making this stuff up. Here are the national health and safety performance standards for early care and education programs. You know, your child cannot stay here if they got a bunch of sores in their mouth that are causing a lot of drooling, all right? So I've got the child care minimum standards to back up my policies. I've got the national performance standards to back up my policies. I also have this form. So, and I'm going to talk about diarrhea here in just a little bit. I just saw a question pop up about the diarrhea. We're going to talk about that next. But I have an illness report that I was going to share with y'all. And if y'all go to my website, timthetrainer.com, and go to documents, you can actually download a copy of this sample illness report. But it's pretty simple. Today's date, child's name, time of illness, staff member's name, you know, and then what is the description of the illness, what is the child's temperature. And you'll notice that right here, I actually cut, and it's kind of hard to see on the Facebook, but I kind of cut and pasted straight from minimum standards. Per the Texas Department of Health and Human Services, Child Care Minimum Standards, Rule 746-3601, licensed child care programs must not allow an ill child to attend the center if, and basically everything we just read off, all right? The illness prevents the child from participating comfortably in the program's activities, including outdoor play. The illness results in a greater need for care, or the child has the temperature that we just outlined. So again, we got this right here in writing. And then you'll notice, was the parent notified by phone? Is the child excluded from care, yes or no? And then when is the earliest date the child can return with no symptoms, all right? No signs or symptoms without medication, all right? So there you go. Yes, I always allow parents to view the minimum standards. That's why I always keep a copy right there at the front desk. I use it a lot, all right, to refer parents to on that one. All right, we saw a comment about diarrhea as well. Again, these national health and safety performance standards, a great resource for you to adopt and amend your policies. We actually updated our policy on diarrhea a couple of years ago. And again, I got the data straight out of this book. And even in the child care minimum standards, in the helpful information box, you can see some good information that, you know, diarrhea is basically loose stool that cannot be contained inside of the diaper, all right? You know, nowadays with all of your organic and gluten-free and homemade, you know, foods and everything, there's a lot of people with loose stool. So what we've got to look at is, can it be contained in the diaper, all right? So if they have 2 or more loose stools, then they need to be excluded, and that's defined as loose stool that is not contained inside of the diaper. So it's leaking down the child's leg and creating a health issue, all right? So, you know, that's what you want to look at with the diarrhea, all right? When you do need to exclude a child from care, now hopefully you're doing your health checks, you're doing your screening whenever the child is arriving from your program. So, you know, technically you should catch illnesses at the beginning of the day whenever the child is being dropped off, all right? You should be able to exclude them before the child goes back and contaminates your classroom. But from time to time, the child may get back into your classroom. They may start getting sick and showing signs or symptoms after they were dropped off. But I really want y'all to reflect on this, because if you are doing everything you're supposed to be doing, you should catch the illness before they are accepted into care. All right? So there you go. I see a question, what about diarrhea for babies? It's the same thing. Can the loose stool be contained in the diaper? All right, can it be contained in the diaper? Yes. And y'all know, you know, I talk about this in class a lot, you know, there's a difference between diarrhea and loose stool. there's a difference between spit up and vomit. All right. And the biggest way you can tell the difference between, loose stool and diarrhea and spit up and vomit is the smell. All right. Vomit and diarrhea has a very distinct smell. Everyone knows that it's vomit or diarrhea. Loose stool or spit up, not so much. All right. But what we want to focus on when it comes to enforcing our policies is, can it be contained in the diaper? All right. That's what you've got to look at. Whenever you do have a child that gets ill in your program, you want to put it in your policies that, parents will be notified of an illness, and put a time frame on it. I've definitely learned in my career that this is important, that once we call you to tell you that your child is excluded from care, the parent has, 1 hour to come and pick up their child. Now, you're going to determine, based on your facility, your location, what type of time frame you want to give your families. I live out in East Texas, and so a lot of people that live where I live actually work in Dallas, and they commute. Well, if the child is in care at a program, out in East Texas, it may take that family a little bit longer to get to the facility. Now, if I was here in Dallas-Fort Worth, which is where I'm at, today, parents should be able to get there, 15, 30 minutes, all right? But definitely put it in your policy manual, a time frame. So they have 1 hour from the time I call you to come and pick up their child, all right? After 1 hour, put it in your policy manual, what am I gonna do next, all right? So if the parent doesn't pick up within an hour, then we're going to start calling emergency contacts, all right? Now depending on how severe the illness is, if it is a life-threatening illness or a severe illness, then the next step might be to call 911 and have an ambulance come and pick up that child. And you want to make sure you outline that in your handbook as well, all right? If the parent fails to pick up the child within an hour of being excluded, make sure you put it in your policy manual that could lead to dismissal from the program. All right? So you got to set some boundaries. You got to set boundaries. Okay, mom and dad, I understand you've got a job. I understand you got responsibilities. I have responsibilities too. I've got to keep 200 children safe and healthy. You've got 1 hour from the time of exclusion to come and pick up your child. If you're unable to comply with that, it may lead to dismissal because you're now placing my entire program at risk. All right? Contact the parent to have the child pick up, put a time frame on it, care for that child apart from the other children. Now, you're going to determine how are you going to care for the child apart from the other children based on how severe the illness is, all right? If it's a common, cold, flu, ear infection, running a temperature, not feeling too good, you can probably put that child on a mat on the opposite side of the classroom, and you can keep the other children away from that ill child and still, maintain adequate supervision of the entire group, all right? And we're only talking about less than an hour, before the parent picks up. So you should be able to do that. Now, if it is a severe illness, all right, a severe or life-threatening illness, then that child probably needs to be removed from the classroom and cared for by a single adult up in the office or in a conference room. Again, adequate supervision and health practices are being followed right here. But again, just know that if you take that child to the front office, you're no longer going to be able to perform administrative or clerical duties. Now, this is a worst case scenario right here, all right? All of this, once again, another reason why we need to be doing a better job of screening the children upon, their arrival to make sure that if there's signs and symptoms of an illness that they're not accepted into care. That way we can eliminate the cross-contamination and having to deal with this right here. All right. Once again, give proper attention to supervision and health practices until the parent picks up, and then make sure that we're washing hands and sanitizing after the child leaves, that everyone involved in the area that the child was in was properly sanitized. We've already kind of talked about when a child can return to care. Of course, the standards say now 24 hours, fever-free, symptom-free, without medication. And again, make sure you're putting that in your policies. Make sure the without medication part is in there. And we're not just talking about temperature. We're talking about signs and symptoms as well. Okay, they need to be free from, okay, signs and symptoms for 24 hours. Not from the time you notice it, from the time the child actually had the signs and symptoms, all right? And you need to have that conversation with mom and dad. I've had them sitting in the parking lot the next day. You know, we sent the child home at 10:30, and they're in the parking lot the next day waiting for 10:31 to bring the child back, all right? It's not 24 hours from the time I notice the symptoms. It's 24 hours from the time the child has the symptoms, all right? So, you know, you want to make sure that you're following that. Okay. One of the last things I wanted to make sure that we talked about in today's webinar when we talk about illness exclusion policies is that you want to also adopt the same policies for your staff, all right? And here's again where we need to do a better job, that your policy on illness exclusion should be the same for your employees as it is for the children, all right? Signs and symptoms, 24-hour symptom-free without medication, not running a fever, all of these things should be followed for the adults in your building as well as the child. So, you don't want to do anything different. We've actually seen a lot of court cases surrounding this, all right? So there's a big legal trend on this, that we follow illness exclusion guidelines for the children, but we tend to get very relaxed and make exceptions when it comes to the adults, all right? Now, one could argue that an adult is better at, making the decision for themselves to wash hands, paying closer attention to sanitizing and disinfecting, being around if they're aware of their surroundings and everything. An adult typically is better at preventing the spread of illnesses than a child is, all right? And that is sometimes the argument. And while I agree with certain points of that argument, they're still contagious, all right? They're still contagious, and they're coming into close contact with the children, and we're spreading that illness right there. So your policy should be the same for both the staff and for the children. And then also, once we do get into a non-pandemic world, hopefully sometime soon, be aware of parents and their signs and symptoms too. So the adults that are dropping off and picking up the children, if you have a mom or dad or guardian that's dropping a child off in the morning and that parent is very ill, all right, then they've probably already exposed their child to the illness. We need to be screening and looking at the adults too, all right, and having some difficult conversations right there, all right? Yes, and Peggy says, parents tend to blame, fever and diarrhea on teething. We got to stop playing the blame game. And regardless of where the fever is coming from, regardless of the factor that's causing the fever, let's go back to policy, because remember I said the decision to exclude should be based on policy, not, child or circumstance. So the policy says that, you must not admit an ill child if they have body temperature of 100, oral temperature of 101. So what factor is causing that temperature is really irrelevant, all right? Because that's what the minimum standards say, that's what your policy says, all right? And that's why you gotta be careful with these generic doctor's notes that are sent in that says, you may give the child Tylenol when needed. Well, we gotta look at why, first off, don't accept that doctor's note. I need to know why I can give Tylenol when needed. What are the signs and symptoms? What are the factors that are causing the illness? Just a generic doctor's note, you can give the child Tylenol when needed. I need more information than that, all right? Under what circumstance can I give Tylenol? And then I gotta look at, you can give the child Tylenol when needed. Well, are they able to participate comfortably in the program's activities? So whatever circumstances is allowing this Tylenol, can they still participate comfortably in the program's activities? And then I'm going to go right back to, is the child sign or symptom free for 24 hours without medication? See, we contradict ourselves right there. The child must have signs and symptoms, or be sign or symptom free for 24 hours without medication, but then we're the ones given the medication when you accept those generic doctor's notes. All right. So yes, and again, when doctor's notes that say a child may return from care, they need to be and this is in the child care minimum standards. The note that you receive from a healthcare professional must specifically state why they can return to care. It needs to specifically state that the child is no longer contagious or the child is no longer ill. All right. But just a generic doctor's note that says, Sabrina was seen in my office and may return to care, not good enough. All right. It needs to specifically say the child is no longer contagious or the child is no longer ill. All right. And once again, that is right here in the minimum standards on what documentation can you receive from a healthcare professional. And I definitely would put that in your parent handbook so that the parent's not blindsided or caught off guard whenever you refuse to take that doctor's note. All right. When they updated this rule, and again, it was 2016, when they updated this rule and added that the doctor's note or the note from the healthcare professional must say the child is no longer contagious or the child is no longer ill, I actually typed up a letter and then included a copy of the minimum standards, that page of the minimum standards, and I mailed it out to all of the local pediatricians. Just, hey, my name is Tim. I'm the director at the center down the street. I just want to make y'all aware of this rule change from Health and Human Services. Anytime you see a patient and you're going to write a note, to avoid future frustration, please make sure that your notes have all of the following information. So, trying to be proactive to, preventing that parent's frustration, your frustration, so that the healthcare professionals in your area know exactly what the notes need to say or the documentation needs to say. All right. I actually had a parent come in one time with a note from a healthcare professional that said, anytime the temperature outside is less than 60 degrees, the child can't go outside. And I've seen notes similar to that were like 40 and 50 degrees, but I'm like 60 degrees? I call that a wonderful day on the playground, at 60 degrees. But first off, I called the doctor's office and I said, hey, I'm not asking you to share any confidential information. I'm not asking you to violate privacy. I just want to verify that you wrote this note because it kind of had red flags all over it. It didn't look legitimate to me. And the nurse practitioner was like, yeah, I wrote the note, and why are you asking? And I'm like, well, it's stupid. You're basically saying the child cannot come to our program anytime it's less than 60 degrees outside. So you are limiting the number of days the child can be in our program. Because again, right here in the child care minimum standards, the child must be able to comfortably participate in the program's activities, including outdoor play. So you just wrote a note saying anytime the temperature is below 60, the child can't come, And the nurse practitioner was like, oh, that's not what it says. And I'm like, yeah, it does. What's your fax number? I'll fax it to you right now. And then I faxed it over to her, and she was like, oh, I didn't know. Well, you know now. And I asked her, I was like, so why did you write this note? Well, the parent asked me to, and then I just, yeah. So, yeah. All right. So, there you go. So pretty simple stuff though, honestly. Follow the minimum standards, cut and paste it right into your policy manual. Just follow up again. Make sure your policy manual says that we are designed to care for well children, not ill children. And so, we want to keep our children well. Put a stronger focus on screening and health checks at the beginning of the day. That's going to help with cross-contamination and illness exclusion. Make sure you're following the same policies for your children and for your staff, all right? We want to make sure that everyone is healthy and safe in our program. All right, so we have a lot of people that attended today's webinar. Fantastic. If this is your first time, there is a link on Facebook. It should already be posted now for a worksheet. You can click on that link. There's two different links. Whether you're going to be paying with a credit card or paying with an online account number. If you are needing a certificate of completion for today's workshop, there's a $5 fee for the 1 hour of training. Click on the applicable worksheet if you're going to pay with credit card or if you're going to pay with an online account number. There's a worksheet with about 6 questions on it, and then I will email your certificate to you right there. All right. I do not have a workshop scheduled for Thursday of this week. I'm kind of anticipating some guidance from Health and Human Services with some of the breaking news that we've had here in Texas. And so I'm kind of leaving Thursday open so that if we have some guidance, we can do a webinar and kind of discuss that material right there. Otherwise, it's going to be a free day. All right. Thank you everybody for joining me this morning, and I hope this was helpful. I hope you were able to write down at least one thing. Remember, the sample illness report is on my website, timthetrainer.com, and there you go. All right, y'all have a great rest of your day, and I will see all of you very, very soon. Take care and make safe and healthy choices. Bye, everybody.